For every series, there is a time of trial. Naughty Dog faced such a fire before they were the beloved studio beneath our feet. The devs braved vast odds before their trees could bear us fruit. As a game player of considerable years, I have known only one such great game, and the sequel it created was a champion for all time. Hello and welcome to this analysis video of a game close to my heart. I am beyond excited to be able to share my thoughts and feelings on this game, and hopefully encourage some people to pick it up who skipped over it before, or have never played Jak and Daxter before in their life. Jak 2 is, given the obvious naming, the sequel to Naughty Dog's Jak and Daxter game. After their success of the Crash Bandicoot games, they moved on to creating a new IP for their forte into the PlayStation 2 console. Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy, was released on December the 3rd, 2001. As of writing this script, the game is just over 20 years old. Needless to say, it went well, and launched a new era for Naughty Dog under the Jak name. I'll take a moment to explain and show off some footage from Jak and Daxter, because one thing that will become very clear as I delve into Jak 2 is the completely different style and tone of the game. The obvious factor everyone will tell you is the guns, of course, but there's much more. In Jak and Daxter, you play as what feels like a cartoon. The game has fantastic squash and stretch animation that really excels in bringing out the charm of each character. Everything is more or less 2 punches or kicks to kill, and every boss has a simple formula to their attack patterns. It's not surprising to know that some of the animation was made by ex-Nickelodeon and Disney staff, making the whole morning cartoon vibe very strong in Jak and Daxter. It's still very much the same vein of the previous Crash games, and borrows a lot of what made those games so entertaining and fresh. Crash has mounts he rides on, for example, so Jak gets a mount too, although the formula for Jak's singular mount is a bit more refined than Crash's sliding polar bear or the 10 seconds of the dino hatchling you get in Crash 3. Jak and Daxter still does bring its own moves to the game, so to say. It was built on an engine all of its own, which made changing and editing things difficult, since the people who knew how to work in the code of the engine were very limited, to say the least. So what they managed to pull from it was amazing. There's a lot of wonderful world building they bring forth as you explore the universe. From the adorable flat hatchling on the cliffs of the sunny beach to an ancient underwater city of the precursors with mysterious technologies, Jak and Daxter has a lot. And if you care to pay attention, you can gauge a lot from the world around you as you explore the different biomes of the levels. But I'm not here to talk all about the first game. If you've never played it, I highly recommend going through the trilogy first and experiencing it all for yourself. But if you have, or you just want to listen to some person overanalyze a 20-year-old game on YouTube, then you've come to the right place. Part 1. The meat of a sequel. Let's get into the main meal here, Jak 2. Or, as it's called in the PAL version that I played, Jak 2 Renegade. Because he's cool and he's got a gun now. We're renegades, baby! No law is too big for Jak to break. Ooh. There's a lot to love in this game, and you can bet I'm here to love it all. Jak 2 stands out, in my mind, as a pretty darn successful sequel, but I'm not talking in terms of sales or boring metadata, so much as the content within the game, and how it was built from the ground up to be a good sequel. Jak 2 takes the approach of tipping its entire gameplay style on its head and reworking a lot. There's still familiar elements from the first game people would know. Jak still has a lot of his old moveset, and Daxter has the same level of bad humor as he did before. You still do the squashy and stretchy movements with each punch and kick, and they still feel as goddamn good as they did before. The sound effects have such a fantastic pop to them, it really resonates with the actions you make Jak perform. Everything is so clean and smooth and snaps fantastically that no matter when I pick up the game, I always feel so confident Jak will follow my controls perfectly. And if I die, it's because of a mistake I made in pointing the gun the wrong way, and not that the controls clunked up. And let's face it, it's usually when I'm trying to be cool and play the game fast, because I've played it so many times I can get pretty cocky in completing missions fast, which leads to my humbling downfall. We all do it sometimes, it's okay to admit. One of the golden rules of a sequel is to never just remake the original material. You don't retell the same plot of the original, and you don't just rehash everything you did in the first game either. When it comes to games, sequels are a lot harder to make than movies. Movies don't have the medium of interactivity that games boast and utilize, and it adds a huge extra layer of decision-making to the sequel creation process. The main thing is to never just use the exact same structure but change the cosmetics to a sequel. You can use the same formula like in the case of games like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, which have similar structures to their gameplay. For example, 5 worlds, 1 boss, move on to the next world kind of thing. But usually you want to shake up the formula a little, add in something spicy to give people who have played the first game something new to look forward to and try out. Add a new mechanic, throw the characters into a new setting, add a new playable character who worms into the story and adds some drama for the old cast, those kind of things. I've talked an embarrassingly long amount of time to people about why I love sequels to games, and I plan to make an entire video discussing another certain game sequel one day in the distant future. But that's a game of X proportions, one may say, but I have no idea what that may mean. Who knows? Some of the things people will tell you make a good sequel are to not make the original and just reskin it, to expand on the themes and world development in the first game, and to show progression in the characters and allow them to evolve now that we have had an entire game or movie with them and are familiar with them already. A sequel is an opportunity for characters to grow and for us to connect with these beloved characters even more by experiencing them go through new troubles with the benefit of all they have developed in the first game's storyline or movie. In most cases, a sequel presents a chance for characters who spent the first game or movie fighting each other to spend time as a team now that they have gone through their shared ordeal and reconciled. You will see this a lot in movies as the ideal way to form a sequel. Toy Story is a good example. It does it with Buzz and Woody. Trolls does it with Poppy and Branch from a different way. And like every buddy cop movie ever out there that has a sequel does it. The list goes on. A lot of the time in sequels, we want to see characters who were a bit prickly in the first game or movie act more chummy or jokey in the sequel. Or we want to see another side of them, see what scenarios can make them truly express themselves. We've met them and now we want a chance to explore new things with them by our side. Or in the case of games, as them. So let's get into some of the meat of Jak 2, the game design. I'll break it up into some different categories: locations, story details, characters, and gameplay elements. Part 2. Location, location, location. Most of the bulk of Jak 2's missions has you zooming around in the hub world, Haven City. The city is split up into several sections designated by coloured zones. As you progress through the game, certain missions will give you the key passes that allow you through the zone borders, opening up new areas of the game. Each zone has its own theme to it. The opening area is referred to as the slums, which is where the poor people live, surprise surprise. It's full of unsturdy looking buildings and everything slapped together like it was made out of clay. The colour passes also colorate to the colour palettes of the areas you visit. It's a nice touch for both designing the areas and making it easy for people to remember what types of areas have which colours. For the slums, everything is tinged in yellow, the clay buildings are all a washed out yellow, and most of the accompanying art assets are browns and reds, very warm and soft in appearance. From the slums you're taken into the industrial area next, which is represented by deeper reds, blacks, and greys. The colour theme is red and all the buildings are angular and tower above you, even when you're on a zoomer. The streets are straight paths, forcing you to move to the map's design. Unlike the haphazard twisting roads in the slums, you could easily break away from traffic to navigate. This is also the zone that houses a popular hub for missions, the Switch Station. Most of your missions from Core and Vin will come through here, and many locations out of Haven City can only be accessed through the gate here. It's pretty central to Cruz and Torn's places, basically in the middle between, which makes it fairly easy to get to as well. There's a reason you go straight through this zone to Cruz Place in your first mission out of the slums. There's similar themes in the other zones, like the yellow bazaar and farming routes that lead into the forest, and the way they come off the industrial zone and the port. The bazaar is interesting as it exists in two different areas, one where the zoomers have a dedicated highway they must travel on, and another where there is a mix of more similar to the slums but without the decay. The map is more blocky, but designed around the shops and stalls where the straight paths through pipes in the industrial area isn't. It makes you feel strange when you first enter, having to abandon your vehicle above to trot through the street stalls. Most first-time players will realize they can attack the fruit stands and send them flying here, which is hilarious and fun to do. But it's also a little weird because you're so used to having easy access to the safety of a vehicle you can easily race away on, that to have that taken away in Haven City makes you a little more on guard. Especially when you first find Onan's hut, a strange, huge tent tucked away in a corner of the bazaar that does not look like it should be there. The bazaar is strange and only gets stranger since the other side of it, where you can zoom through on a zoomer, is where you find Bruta, the lurker who can talk. Speaking of Bruta, he's honestly a genius addition to explain the fate of the lurkers in this game, but I'll go into it later. Let's put a pin in him for now, or around him. Let's not pin Bruta. Needless to say, the design elements that go into the environments of Jak 2 are fantastic. So many tiny details come together to guide you through the hub world, helping you memorize landmarks and key areas of the map for future missions, or on replay. This is especially present for the many races and timed missions of the game leading through Haven City. Jak 2 also has a day and night cycle, just like the first game. Something very fantastic about this is the way it functions in a lot of locations, not just in Haven City. It adds a whole new shade of color palettes and lighting effects when you swap from the bright day into the cool tones of the night. The pumping station turns into a mess of bright industrial lighting during the night, illuminating the pathways, while during the day, the dusty sands and plants shine brighter, greens and beiges dominating the landscape. Dead Town is a lonely place in the day, bright sunlight scorching the broken ruins, while it turns into a dark, sweltering graveyard at night, with moonlight desperately reflecting off the murky water surface. Perhaps the most noticeable in terms of change is Haven Forest. The daytime setup is gorgeous, luscious greens and yellows of a warm, growing environment. But at night, it turns tranquil, quiet. Everything is covered in blue hues, cool, soft, and calming. It is honestly one of the best day and night places to visit, and that atmosphere has stuck with me for years. I'll always remember racing through my first mission during the day, watching the forest be bright and vibrant, and see it shift into the peaceful soft night as I hoverboarded around the ponds and fallen trees. It's truly beautiful. Everywhere you go, the palettes and atmosphere are built to perfection. It serves to make each environment feel unique and breathe life into the world. Now that we've taken a moment to talk about the design of the city, let's move on to some details of the story. Part 3. The Story. At the beginning, the story picks up right where the first left off. At the end of the first game, spoilers, when you collect all the power orbs, you unlock the giant golden doors to reveal an ancient precursor machine. You don't see it in Jak and Daxter, but it's there at the start of the second game, being set up for travel. It's basically implied. Things turn upside down very fast as a huge monster appears in the gate, and you're thrown into a whole new world when you go through the ring. Jak is captured immediately while Daxter runs away. Jak's experimented on for 2 years, yes, that's right, 2 years, in jail before Daxter has the chance to rescue him. This is also where the 2006 PSP game Daxter takes place, although I've personally never played it enough to form an opinion on it. PSPs basically didn't exist to me for the longest time. My parents let us have one handheld console each, and I wasn't about to give up Pokemon. With the rescue, you find one of the main new changes in this game. Jak talks. Yeah, not a popular decision from what I've observed from people's reactions to the game. It's crucial for interactions with the characters, and literally the crux of the comedy in this game, which I'll get to later. Jak's decisions and personal influences are important for him to discuss and show to other characters, so he can clash and butt heads with people frequently. It's a new world, everyone wants something from him, and he's just been through an experience where no one has shown him kindness for 2 years. He's unsure, defensive, and only cares to get revenge on the people who seriously messed with him. In his own words,
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
There's a colourful cast of characters you meet throughout the game. Unlike the one-offs you meet to have one mission with in the first game, they expanded on this with more reoccurring characters. You have some you do a few missions for, and others who are main leaders of factions you deal with frequently. I like this approach a lot more, as it gives the characters more screen time and chances to show off their personalities in the colourful fun of the cutscenes. Naughty Dog are fantastic at giving their characters wonderful designs, and their personalities only shine brighter with the voices the actors give in their performances. Everyone might only have a few things that you can identify in their personalities from the few scenes, but they become memorable in what they're given, even more so the more interactions you have with those characters. You don't actually see Baron Praxis much at all during the game, but the times you do see him, you know what he's about and what his character motivations are. Even at the end, when you don't really feel sorry for this guy with how he's handled everything, you still have to admire how he stuck to what he believed in until the very last moment. He gives you the bomb after he dies, spoilers, because he knows you're strong enough to actually do what he couldn't. Despite how much you've been fucking with his operations, and killed basically everyone who works for him at this point. Meanwhile, a character like Jinx is only given one mission you see him in, but because of the mission he's in, perhaps somewhat infamously though, people remember him. The faction leaders and people responsible for giving you missions do have the most personality I find, but maybe that's because we spend more time with them. I do love everyone in this game, but the leaders do have something about them that's fantastically done. Each faction leader and the characters that work under them and also give you missions has a specific method they want you to approach with their missions. Overall, there's this gunslinging approach Jack takes to most jobs, but there's tiny differences you find in what the individuals want you to do. So let's talk about those faction leaders.
Kill metalheads? Get toys? Sounds good to me.
Part 4. Faction Leaders. You have a few main teams that fight and team up at different parts of the game. The main one is the Underground, which you'll be introduced to in your first mission. Torn is the acting leader, the face of the operation basically. The actual faction leader is the Shadow, who is mysterious and won't reveal himself until a good portion of the way through the plot. You then have Crew's selfish interests in his own kind of faction, shakily aligned with the Underground for mutual benefit. You have missions from Core, who acts aligned with the Underground, but not really a part of it. He makes you do things basically for the Underground, but everything he asks of you, he comes up with. There's nothing Torn asks Crew to give you or the like. He works adjacent to the Underground's more spy-like missions. Vin is similar in that his missions align with the Underground, but he does all of them for the sake of keeping the city's eco-barrier working. You start to take missions directly from Core and Vin after their first introduction missions from the Underground, which means you're doing separate tasks, not really things directly asked for by Torn or the Shadow. Actually, let's talk about the Shadow a bit more. The reveal of who the Shadow is actually brilliantly done. The mission they send you on beforehand is a grueling gauntlet of metalheads out in Dead Town, which takes you up into what used to be the living quarters of people out there. If you pay attention to the conversations the characters have, you can actually learn that Dead Town used to be within the city walls and the Underground fought to keep it together once the Baron decided to shorten the eco-barrier over the city. The Underground was forced to abandon it to the metalheads, retreating into the slums and leaving the city to crumble and fall apart, and become a literal dead town. Which is honestly just a really cool detail and explains why the characters frequently want you to go back there and pick up forgotten items, things that people probably couldn't grab in their rush to leave a siege ground. But back to the Shadow and the mission. You go through the gauntlet and reach the destination at the end, which leads to the big reveal that Samos's hut, the very same place from the beginning of Jak and Daxter, is here in Dead Town. Jack quickly makes the connection that the presence of this hut means that the horrible world they have been transported to was actually their world all along. On your way back to the hideout, Torn stops you at the door in the cutscene to tell you that the Shadow is ready to meet you. Jack walks forward and the reveal is Samos. The Shadow is Samos, although a strange-looking version, an almost younger-looking version. He doesn't know who Jak and Daxter are, and quickly sends them away on another mission. It's a great setup that immediately gives you a strange kind of payoff in the form of a let's put a pin in that for later. And it isn't until you meet the Samos Jak knows, and who knows Jak, that you start to get an idea of the happenings of the game's plot outside of the struggle to overthrow Haven City's dictator. So, Crew. Crew's missions are very straightforward. He's a collector of weird shit, and he wants you to get him new weird things for his bar. The first mission you do for him is literally assistant work for the guy with the huge frickin' gun, who's going out to bag metalhead heads as trophies. All of your gun upgrades come from Crew's missions, which feeds into the selfish missions for a selfish gain aspect. You work for Crew because he gives you good rewards, not because you agree with what he wants. And spoilers, Jak literally kills him because he got in the way of what Jak wanted. I don't know why I said spoilers. You really should know this far into the video I'm going to spoil everything. Going back to Bruta from before, savvy players of the first game will be used to seeing these big purple guys and knowing to bash them up before they cause trouble. But Bruta is your first introduction to lurkers in the world of Haven City, and he serves to teach you that lurkers have just really never gotten the chance to be their own people. It's kind of sad when you think about it, like, lurkers have been forced to work for those nasty elf people since forever. In Jak and Daxter, they did all of the labor for Gol and Maya, and you start to wonder if they ever had a say in it, or if Gol and Maya were manipulating them all along. Bruta seems like a well-put-together dude who just happens to be a big fluffy purple guy. His speech is a little broken, but he gets his point across very easily. Also, he runs a shop in the bazaar. That says a lot, right? So, where these creatures were eco-fodder in the first game, now they are basically animals being used for labor against their will, and you honest to God have to break them out of their prisons to save them. And when you do, they jump into holes leading underground, probably to go into hiding, which is... yeah, that. I'll dive some more into the factions and their missions in the next part, because there's another thing this game does really well and I want to gush about it. Part 5. Storytelling through mission details. Something that's honestly one of my favorite things about Jak 2 is the missions with core. But not like the actual missions, because, not gonna lie, the worst mission in the game comes from this guy. Feel free to disagree with me if you want, rant about it in the comments, whatever. I stand by this decision. Look, I know a lot of people say the third sewer mission is the worst, and I definitely agree, it's a horrible mission. Yes, I do mockingly quote Jinx all of the time, and I do still love Jinx. Bless that cameo in Jak 3, the developers knew what was up with him. But the on-the-rails shooter mission with core is horrible, and truly 1,000 times worse than the Jinx's sewer mission. At least with Jinx, if you're good at knowing where all the metalheads spawn from, you can get through the mission usually on the first or second try. But the on-the-rails shooter, my god, the cooldown and precision for that opening part with the 50 soldiers is god-awful, and they swarm you so fast it's easy to get overwhelmed. It makes the actual tanker part of the mission a joke. But back to core. A lot of his missions involve you running around destroying the Baron's operations. But the way it's handled, you can stand back and look at all the missions core gives you and work out a different meaning once you know the truth. It's subtle, of course, but it's fantastic in its execution when you consider this. The truth being that core is the metalhead leader, of course. One good example comes from that very same horrible mission out on the drill platform. Core sends you out to blow up a tanker transporting eco into the city, and says the underground will pick up the barrels and salvage later. But you'll notice that you pretty much destroy the cargo ship and it crash lands off screen somewhere. That doesn't sound like your everyday simple takeover, ready to ship off the eco and repurpose it, now does it? That's because Core doesn't actually care about getting the eco from the underground. In fact, he probably just lied about that part. His real goal was to deal a blow to the Baron and cut off another eco supply. With that tanker's eco gone, the Baron has even less to barter with now, and Core, as the metalhead leader, is just biding his time patiently while the Baron's forces grow weaker, and the underground does most of his work for him. It's genius and I love it. A perfect use of using your game's missions to progress the story, while also still having the short comedy sketches of the cutscenes. Torn's missions all involve sabotaging the Baron's forces and causing trouble for his network of activity. When you climb the Baron's tower and get into a fight with him, the very next mission Torn gets angry at you for causing the Baron's forces to go on high alert, endangering all of his other agents. You have to transport them to safer areas to literally save their lives from your misguided one-man army assault. An early mission from Torn has you blowing up an ammo dump in the Crimson Guard's headquarters, so that the Baron can't stock his police force with their latest round of death weapons. Jak 2 doesn't mess around when you actually stop and think about the things you do for these faction leaders. It's kind of wild. As for some of the other faction leaders, Kira only ever wants you to work for the Racers, and Bruta keeps his missions involved with the exploits of his people, the Lurkers, as we discussed before. Actually, Bruta sends you out to the dig at one point, because the Lurkers there have been forced to work on the Baron's mining operations and have found a piece of the Seal of Ma, which is a huge plot point in the mid-game of Jak 2. And since you've been cozying up to Bruta by doing him some serious solids during the game, he trusts Jak with this information. Vin is an interesting one, because not only is he aware of the bigger picture of metalheads assaulting the eco-resources fueling Haven City, but he actively sends Jak out to deal with them in an effort to keep you all alive. You see firsthand in the drill platform and the dig, areas outside of the city walls that are used to collect eco. They both become overrun with metalheads at one point or another, and sometimes twice in the same area, and left alone, they would destroy the operations in those areas, and continue to suck out the eco that the city desperately needs to keep its protective walls running. Vin is basically the unsung hero of this game, because he's the one keeping an eye on the thing keeping you all alive. And, near the end of the game, the wall does fall, and metalheads do invade the city. It's scary seeing this place you once had free reign over full of the creatures threatening you. You can't walk around normally anymore, and you'll always be wanting to race to the nearest zoomer for the protection of the sky. It makes everything feel more tense, like you're on borrowed time. This is truly the final moments of the game as you quickly head to the climax of Haven City's factions, storming the Metalhead Nest. This is what makes Core's missions so much more delightful when you realize his twisted reasoning. Jak 2 is surprisingly deep in its actions and storytelling outside of the immediate go here, do this attitude the cutscenes readily portray. The cutscenes are fun, but the world beyond them is even more so. Part 6. The Guns. Alright, so I've rambled on already a lot, but we can't talk about Jak 2 without one of the most controversial changes to the series it made. In the first game, Jak's moveset is limited to punches and kicks. For certain sections of the game, he's given special power-up boosters of coloured eco, which all have their own individual powers, but that's not all the time. For Jak 2, he still punches and kicks like Jak 1 Jak, but instead of eco power-ups, he's given 2 new features. One is Dark Jak, a frenzy melee attacker with extra power behind his attacks and a limited timer on his use. The other is, of course, the guns. As you progress through the game, you're given 4 different types of guns. The scattergun is the first, marked with red color coding. It fires a small blast around your immediate area and is good for close-range enemies crowding you. The second is the blaster, yellow in color, and fires a beam of 1 shot per ammo. It's the most common weapon you'll end up using for both its ammo capacity and range of access. It ends up becoming the perfect balance of the two and often proves better to use than the scattergun's limited range and ammo and the Vulcan's fast, less damaging ammo. Speaking of, Vulcan is the third, with blue ammo and an incredibly fast rate of fire. The last is the Peacemaker, the purple gun, a gun you're introduced to early in the game with your first SIG mission. He uses one to destroy some strong metalheads your little scattergun would have no chance against. This actually serves 2 great purposes as an early mission. It sets up the brutalness of the Peacemaker, so when you get your own, it feels great to know you can get your own version and it wasn't just a gun exclusive to SIG. The second setup is with the crab metalheads. I'm sure they have names, but look, young me made up her own names and hey, they stuck. These metalheads fire fast and have a lot of health. If you went up against them with just a scattergun, you'd be in for a hard time. So when you go back to the pumping station later and see these roaming around, you get a sense that you've gotten more powerful, and that things are going to get harder from here on out. You're the badass with the powerful gun now. You're the main hitting force. Ain't no SIG to protect you this time. Progression slopes up during the game at a fairly decent pace in this way. You're introduced to new, stronger enemies at a regular pace that makes them easier to digest. The game doesn't give you a whole bunch of new powerful ones in one go. Instead, you face new enemies and more important story missions, which then gives you time to grow used to their patterns and gimmicks, and how best to kill them before another enemy is introduced. Except for those fucking squid ones in that vault mission. We will never discuss them. Seriously, fuck those enemies. Part 7. The Old, the New, and the Edgy. Over the years, a lot of criticism over Jak 2 has changed and come around. Especially for fans of the first game, a lot of people found the change from the happy-go-lucky atmosphere of Jak and Daxter to the darker, more grim world of Haven City to be too stark of a contrast. This is, of course, a valid concern, and for some people the darker, edgier change with guns wasn't for them, and that's fine. Jak 2 is definitely a product of its time, during the early to mid-2000s where video games were getting more gritty and first-person shooter games like Call of Duty, Gears of War, and Fallout 3 were driving that high-value market. But Jak still decided to keep a lot of what was made in Jak 1 without going full-on apocalypse Mad Max style. Not until Jak 3, of course. But I'm here to talk about why I think that pivot was good for the series. In a sequel, something I think is important is to shake up something from the original game's formula. A sequel exactly the same as the original, but with, say, just a different artistic setting, wouldn't feel as new or fresh. It's why, like we discussed in the opening segment, just remaking the original material is a bad way to make a sequel. For example, Generation 2 games of Pokemon, Gold and Silver, they kept the basic formula of the first generation, Red and Blue. Pokemon battles and adventuring was mostly the same, but 2 new types were introduced, a whole ton of moves, and the day and night cycles, which seriously affected some aspects of the game and what it was built around. Pokemon has done a lot over the years, some good, some bad, in how it handles sequels in its main generation games, but the jump from 8-bit to 16-bit was a big change and really showed how they utilized their systems to improve aspects of the game. This is why we discussed the importance of continuing character stories in sequels. With the characters already established in their roles, it's time to give them new scenarios to deal with. And Jak 2 goes out of its way to give Jak and Daxter many, many new situations to deal with. The guns serve as a brand new gameplay style, and one they clearly enjoyed enough to refine in the sequel, Jak 3. Because it's central, a lot of Jak and his missions are built around them. You can't really kick and slap your way through a horde of metalheads, or waltz up to the crab ones and punch it until it dies. You probably could, but I'm just saying. You need the blaster to hit everything as it runs at you, the scattergun to blast those creeping up all around you, and the peacemaker when you just want to murder something. Please don't take that out of context. And Jak obviously needs to talk for the kind of story they want to tell with Jak 2. Don't know if it needs to be tortured trauma to unlock his muted powers, but hey, that's the direction we went in and that's where we are. Jak's "I'm just here for revenge" attitude works well with the fact everyone else is truly a video game character in that they want Jak to just do things for him. He argues, he rolls his eyes, and best of all, he bargains about it. He works for Crew even though Kira tells him he shouldn't, because Crew's connections and rewards far surpass the others in the ragtag underground team. Jak is a man with his own ambitions and reasons, and he likes to make sure you know that as he grows more used to his role in Haven City. I find that evolving previous experiences and bringing in new elements to a gameplay can really bring out the best in a sequel. There's a lot to work with when you have the base of the first game, but at the same time, you run the risk of keeping your sequel too close to the first and lacking an individuality to the sequel's flair. And Jak 2 is anything but lacking individuality. I hope I've been able to show you even one example of that from my gushing list. Part 8. Jak 2's Comedy. It's peak perfection. So many wonderful quotable lines to chuckle over, and so many great character expressions to replicate. The first game had a lot of one-off characters that would have to make an impression for their one mission you see them for, but with Jak 2, many more come back for multiple missions, especially those that are responsible for giving you them in the faction leaders. Torn, Crew, Vin, Onan and Pekka, the list goes on. They all present their missions in different ways, and the way our protagonist interacts with them changes not only as the story progresses, but as more characters are introduced. Characters feel like they have more presence in Jak 2. They're colourful and vibrant and all fantastically designed. There's life breathed into every action, and it's thanks to the amazing skills of the animators over at Naughty Dog who brought them all to life. But something that should always be considered is that everyone's individual taste in comedy is different, so what I may like, you may not. And that's okay. It's something you have to experience and come to a conclusion about yourself. But hey, you clicked on this video. And if you're this far, first of all, thanks, you're a trooper. And second of all, it's just my opinion that Jak 2 is peak comedy, and I love it. That's all. So let's wrap this thing up. Upon writing this script, Jak 2 is 19 years old. It's about to celebrate its 20-year anniversary next year. This game is older than thousands and thousands of people on this planet today. Thousands of people have played this game over the years, and thousands more will play it in the years to come, or at least I hope. A game's impact and desires don't end when the game comes out. One of the greatest things about games and movies is that they live on in eternity. 19 years later, someone could be watching this video and decides to play a 38-year-old game. Jak 2 is a fantastic game. The world it builds and paints around is such a masterful experience, I can't help but gush and ramble about how much this game means to me. I spent years replaying the hell out of this series, and especially the second game, which was actually the first PlayStation 2 game we ever owned in my house. It has a very special place in my heart. If you've ever picked up the first game and want to try the second game again, or for the first time, after hearing me ramble about it, I implore you, try it. Or watch someone else play it if you're more about that, just experience Jak 2 for yourself in some way. This is a game that suffered a lot from the direction it took compared to the first game, but the developers believed in what they were doing and stuck to it. I stand by the decisions the team made in this game, and fully believe in the course they took with Jak 2. We need more interesting and different approaches in games. Things to stand in time as examples of the periods they were made, and to exist as an endless source of entertainment and teaching. I think Jak 2 is a great example of that. Thank you for watching. I'd like to thank my Patreons as well for their support as always. It really helps. And anyone who watched this video and gave it a shot. I hope you like Jak 2, or at least listening to me talk about it. And if not, that's fine. Thanks for watching anyway. If there's one thing I've learnt from my previous game analysis videos, it's that people very much love to tell their own stories and experiences with the games I talk about. So feel free to do that below if you want. Until next time, this is Ashe signing out.